Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Melissa if you're new here. For today's video, we are going to be talking about my moss poles right here behind me and how I care for them. This is going to be more of a vlog style video because I really need to water my moss poles. I should have watered them 2 days ago. I'm going to show you my process and what I do to care for my moss poles. I'm not going to water all my poles in this video. I'll just kind of take you through my process, some signs I look for, and I'll show you kind of how the moss looks when it's really dry versus when it's wet, and kind of some other things I do to care for them in between watering. So this here is my moss pole corner, and I have a couple more on the end I don't really want to show yet. I want to keep those a secret, but these are my oldest ones here. Obviously my philodendron micans. Look at that beautiful, gorgeous new leaf. So beautiful. I love this plant. And my Monstera adansonii, I'm actually going to be chopping this guy soon. He's almost reaching the top, so he is going to get chopped in half. And this is my marble queen, growing tall, and my hederaceum back there. And these are some newer ones that I have done recently, so they really haven't started growing. All my poles are dry, like bone dry, and I gotta take care of that. These are my old poles. These are plastic netting, and as you can see, I have a stake to the back to support the pole because plastic netting does get wobbly. Like, can you hear how dry that moss is? It's crunchy, it's dry. There is no moisture left inside of this pole. This guy has roots growing inside of the pole, and there's some that are growing like way inside of the pole. So it's not good for those aerial roots to dry out. So it's really important to keep the poles moist as best as I can. So when I water, you can just hear how dry that is. So when they get like that, I will do a thorough drink from the top with a bottle, using a bottle method. And this isn't my method. I don't know who came up with it. So I take my poles to the bathroom to water, and I will take you guys in there with me. Just because I have carpet in here, it's kind of hard to water where they're at. And since plastic netting is pretty wobbly, I don't trust that they won't tip over. I'll water some of these taller ones with you, and then I'll water some of the ones that have metal, because these are how my new poles are being made with the metal hardware cloth, and they're a lot more steady and stable. I could probably water these guys in their spots, but just to avoid a mess and a disaster, I'm just going to be taking these to the bathroom, and I'll show you how I water them. All right, so I have brought some poles into, this is like my little plant bathroom where I water everything. What I use is, so this is my towel rack, and I will attach a hook to these plastic poles to water them with a bottle, because as soon as I put a heavy water bottle on top of my poles, it's going to start leaning and get wobbly. It's not going to support itself. So I kind of maneuver something to hook them onto my towel rack so that they don't fall while they're getting watered. So I will water my micans pole and my Monstera adansonii with you guys. And I brought in 2 of the metal poles, and these guys can support themselves. I don't have to secure them because the metal cloth is a lot more stable. These guys are potted into a clear pot. So any new poles I make, they're going to be in a clear pot so I can keep an eye on things, and they're going to be using the metal. And for my plastic poles, I usually leave them in their heavy ceramic base. It just makes them more sturdy when I go to water them, except my adansonii. I didn't, just because it's a pretty big base that I have him in. I don't really have a planter for him. So you can already see that he's kind of leaning without that ceramic base. He can stand without a heavy ceramic base, but when I go to water him, that pole is going to get really super heavy with that wet moss. So he's going to need to sit in something to keep him stable. I will prepare the bottles to water the poles with. I've been using these. I only fill them about halfway because this big of a bottle on top of those poles makes them too top heavy. So I'll fill this with water and my fertilizer to water them. So I've just been filling up with warm tap water, not hot, not cold, but just like lukewarm water, and I'll fill it about halfway and then add my fertilizer in. I'm testing out a new fertilizer, so I don't want to share it yet, but normally I would use my liquid dirt. This is my normal fertilizer, and I have it pre-mixed in a jug already, and I would use that to water my poles. But I'm going to be adding a little bit of my new fertilizer in these bottles, and I will share more once I decide that I like it. But basically, any fertilizer that you're using, you want to water your poles with your fertilizer water. So I will fill this up and add my fertilizer, and I will show you how I water them. So this is the other important thing that I use to water my moss poles is a pump sprayer. It costs $10. I got it from a hardware store, and you can also get one on Amazon. And I fill this up. This is a gallon pump sprayer, and I will fill this up with my fertilizer water as well. I just take it to my tub to fill it up with lukewarm water. I use this first before I do the bottle method, and I'll show you how I use this, but this is a lifesaver. I used to use an electric mister, and I still use it sometimes, but this is a lot more convenient. All right, so I have my pump sprayer ready to go. I just put some diluted fertilizer in there. It's not super fertilized, but I just did enough to, wet the poles. Since this moss is all the way dried out, it's going to be what's called hydrophobic, and it's going to repel water. So basically, if I try to water my pole with it dry, all that water is just going to fall out. Do you see there? Because it's completely dry. So dry moss, just like dry compacted soil, repels water. And so I need to moisten the moss first. So what I do is I take my pump sprayer. I need to pump it first. And this pump sprayer has a couple different settings, but I like the fine mist like that. And so what I will do is I will mist this entire pole before I use the bottle method. And if I get water on the walls in here, it's the bathroom, it's fine. I don't really care too much. And the more poles you have, obviously, the longer this is going to take. And I don't water all my poles at the same time, because I just don't have enough bottles for that and enough space. So I will water like 3 or 4 at a time. And then usually while those are drinking, I will go and water other plants in my collection. Okay, so now that the pole has been misted, you can kind of see how the moss is wet. So this is wet, but it's not watered. You still hear that? That is dry inside. So this does not count as watering my poles. And this misting only lasts for barely half a day, and it goes completely dry again. So you have to thoroughly saturate the poles. And so how I do that is, you ready? I take a bottle. Let's see if I can do this with one hand. 1, 2, 3, flip, just like that. And see, the metal poles, the bottle will stay and the pole won't lean. But again, my bottles are a little big. I need to find some smaller bottles. I need to get some of the Fiji ones because I think those would be better. So it's just gonna sit on top, and you can see how it's bubbling. Do you hear that? That is going to moisten the moss all the way down and thoroughly saturate it all the way down. So when that water gets to be about here, sometimes you really can't see it because I've wet this first. So I usually know the pole had enough water when the pot starts dripping out water. That means the water has soaked all the way down through the soil and the pot is now dripping out. So When I see that happen, this pole has had plenty of water, and I will let these completely drain before I put them back. Because sometimes this moss, when it gets watered and saturated all the way through like this, it'll continue dripping because that moss is super saturated. So I will make sure that these drain very thoroughly before I put them back in their actual pots. So I usually fill these big bottles up. This is a liter. I usually fill it up about halfway and let it water. And depending on, I may need to add another bottle on top or a little bit more depending on, you know, if the water saturated all the way through to the soil. So we'll see. I kind of keep an eye on it, and you know, we'll see how it goes. Obviously the taller, bigger poles will take more water. So, and it depends on how big around your poles are too, and how much moss is actually packed inside of the poles. Because if you have more moss packed in there, it's going to take longer for it to saturate, and it'll take more water to saturate, if that makes sense. Sometimes they get going a little bit faster. Once this moss starts getting saturated, it'll drink up faster. And I'm going to set these other ones up, and I'll show you kind of how I secure the plastic. So that is what I've come up with to water my plastic poles. It's just the best way that I have found so that they don't fall over while I'm watering them with the bottle method. Now, some of these are faster drinker than others, you know, depending on the consistency of the moss. If it's more densely packed, it's going to have a slower time draining. Whereas this one I could tell was loosely packed because this one finished the entire bottle already. So that one drank a little too fast. So I'm gonna wait and let that kind of saturate for a few minutes, and then I'll refill it and, you know, let it water again, because I don't see where it's gotten the actual pot wet yet. So I'm gonna give it a minute to kind of saturate, and then I will refill that bottle. And another important thing is if you don't have enough moss, that water is just gonna come flowing straight out. So basically, the higher up the moss is, you want enough room that the bottle can fit on top without falling, but you also don't want there to be a huge gap where there's no moss, because then that bottle isn't going to fit on here. So basically that moss is securing the bottle on there, so it's not just like free flowing and draining. And sometimes I have to get them situated on here a little bit, because sometimes I find they're not draining. And once they kind of get started a bit, you'll see that they'll start to drain and water. Yeah, it's just basically like a waiting process. Some drink more than others. Some take longer, some go faster. It really just depends on the consistency of the moss inside the pole. This one's a little bit bigger, this one's gonna take a little bit more water. So there's a lot of variables. So that's why when someone asks me, well, how much do you water your poles, or how do you water them? It's gonna vary greatly depending on that particular pole. It's never the same for each pole. It's always gonna be different. So look at that gorgeous leaf. It's so beautiful. I am coming back on, and so this Mican's just finished the first bottle. It is empty, and I wanted to show you. So I'm gonna have to do another half, well, it was a half bottle, so I'm gonna do another half bottle, because I don't know if you can see. So you can feel like when I squeeze, do you see the water coming out of there? So that is moistened all the way through, and it kind of stops about right here. It's still dripping down a little bit, but you can tell it's still dry from this part down. So I think another half bottle should water it all the way through, and where enough of it will drip into the pot. So this guy's gonna take another half bottle. That one's still a little bit slow. I'm gonna have to reposition that one. That doesn't seem to be draining for some reason. That one's giving me a harder time. This one is sucking down water too fast, and that one's still making progress. So, and you can kind of see on this pole where it's a little bit lighter in color here towards the bottom, and it starts to get a little bit darker here. So it has saturated this pole probably to like right here. So that one might be enough to water this entire plant. We'll see once that's done. I might have to refill it a little bit more just so that this whole thing can get saturated. I'm going to refill up the Micans pole and let these guys continue to drink, and I'll update you guys in a little bit. All right, so this Siltepecana pole is done. This is a little backlit, so hopefully you can see okay. So it has another new leaf for me here. So what I do is I take these little greening pins and I help secure any new growth to the actual moss. Really helps it attach a little bit better. So I just kind of pin it like that as each new growth forms. I would give this guy like another month or so and he should kind of start taking off, because when you have like fresh cuttings, it's going to take them a bit to get established in the actual soil first, and then once they kind of root in a bit, then they will start focusing on new growth. And this guy has drained all the way through. The soil is wet, the pot feels heavy. I'm gonna let this drain just a little bit longer, and then I will put him back in his cash pot. Hey guys, it is a little bit later. We actually got a really bad storm here, so I had to stop filming. It was lightning and like crazy winds and rain. It was really bad. So I am going to pick back up here. I honestly have gotten kind of lazy and I still have a lot of poles to water. I just like, I don't know, it just like started storming. I like sat down and got on my phone and I'm just like, I didn't feel like getting back up. So I'm gonna get the rest of my poles watered. I'll give you a little update on these poles that we're still watering and kind of show you what's happened with them so far. And then I'm going to water the rest of my poles and I will show you the setup in the room once they're all watered. So let me show you what is going on here, and then I'm going to get to watering the rest of my poles. So my Cebu Blue here is done being watered. That was the drip pan that it was in. So all that was like extra water that had drained out from being, you know, watered with the bottle. So it's still kind of draining a bit in this one. I think it's pretty much done, and you can kind of see where it's watered everything thoroughly just by having, you know, it watered from the top. And same thing with this one. This little cutting here is off the pole. So I'm going to attach this guy, you know, and as it starts growing, those aerial roots will start forming and adhering to the pole. Once I attach these cuttings, that's when I really start to water from the top instead of just like misting. So I will get that guy as close to the pole as I can, like that. You know, once they get their roots settled, and they, you know, then focus their energy on growing leaves, then they start growing pretty quickly. So yeah, that is that one. All right, so this pole is very unsteady without it being in a heavy ceramic because it is plastic. You see it's like falling over. So I can't leave him out of his nursery pot for very long. About a liter of water went into this pole. So I'm going to dump that out and put him back in here, and then I'll put him back in his spot. And so my Adansonii pole here, it has had about a liter of water as well. And you can tell that the moss is wet all the way down the bottom of the pole. I don't feel any of that hard stuff. And it looks like it wet the soil pretty much as well too. So I don't water the soil at all, whatever is done. If the water drains down to the end of the pole, then I know it got the soil as well. And sometimes a little bit drains out, sometimes none drains out, you know, sometimes a lot drains out. It just depends on how much water I will actually pour down the top of the pole. So once it's saturated down all the way, then that's all the water that I will give. I will let it drain and put it back. Check out some of those gnarly roots and look at those attached. So it is very late. It is like 9 o'clock at night. My grow lights just went out on this side. I have a little bit of grow light left to work with. So I have taken off my entire section of moss poles. I'm working on the last few that still need watered. And for some reason today has just been an off day. It normally doesn't take me this long to water poles, but I don't know, for some reason it just took me a while to get through them all. I have a mess here. I don't know if you guys can see that well since it's getting dark and I really want to finish this video, but I just like take the vacuum and I will vacuum off all the dirt and dust and everything and put them all back, and so it's all nice and clean. All right, sorry it's a little dark. I should probably wait till tomorrow to refilm this outro, but I sort of want to just get it done. Sometimes I'll rearrange them depending on like the order I put them back, if that makes sense. The most important thing is making sure that they drain, because sometimes I will find water fills up in these pots again. You know, while that moss is still wet, it's still dripping into the soil, you know, because of gravity. That water that you put on top is going to continually drip down the pole, and it's going to continually drip into the soil and out through the drainage holes. So I'll keep an eye on them. And the ones in the cache pot, what I'll probably do is tomorrow morning, I'll come in here and just lift some of these up out of their cache pots. And if I see a pool of water, then I'll dump it right away. So all my moss is completely soaked and saturated. I don't know if you can see how wet that moss is. So everything is completely wet and saturated. You can see that there is water and condensation in the pot. You can see the roots. So the biggest thing is making sure it drains all the way and emptying the saucer trays. All right, I hope you guys can see me okay. Sorry it's kind of late. I have my ring light on, so hopefully the lighting is okay. So I'll just touch on a few more points before I kind of end this video. So it's really hard to kind of tell you like how much water and how to water your poles, because everyone's environment is different. Like my temperature in my plant room some days gets up to 80 degrees, and that causes my plants and my poles to dry out a lot faster. So there's no certain amount of water. I just will water the pole until it is completely saturated and dripping out of the bottom of the pot. I let it fully drain, and I will empty the cache pot or the saucer tray. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I do that once a week, and that should last for a good 2 to 3-ish days. And on that second day, I'll take a bottle with water and dump some down the top of the pole just to ensure that that moss stays damp a little bit longer. I will use my pump sprayer after they start to get that crunchy, dry feeling. I'll use my pump sprayer and spray the entire poles. And I have to use that pump sprayer every day until I water the poles again. It really takes me a long time to water my poles, I'm not gonna lie. It does take a lot of work. I wish for me there was a faster way to water them, but just like how I water my plants, it takes me a really long time to just water in general. So I'm sure it may not take you as long, and then I easily get distracted too, so go figure. But it takes me a while to water my poles. It's a mess. I have to take everything to the bathroom. It is a huge mess for me. If you don't really care about getting big leaves, then I would not recommend doing this kind of pole for your plant. There's plenty of other options for your plants to climb. You can use a core pole, you can use a wood plank, you can use bark instead of moss. You know, the roots will still grow and attach, and they'll still climb. They may not get and achieve as big of leaves as sphagnum moss, but that's okay. You know, if you don't really care to achieve big leaves, then I would not really recommend this, because it is a lot of upkeep, and just to be honest with you, they are a lot of work, and you really have to appreciate growing your plants up a pole and the big leaves to really fall in love with them. And once you start seeing that growth, it really makes all that work worth it, because when I come in this plant room, staring at these moss poles is one of the first things that I come and look at. I just love seeing the new growth and what has changed from day to day. It's something that truly brings me happiness, and I thoroughly enjoy it. So I don't want it to ever feel like a chore. So if I get to a point where I'm feeling like the poles are stressing me out, then I just won't be able to do anymore, and I'll just have to enjoy the plants I currently have on a pole, because I don't even know, I probably have like 20 poles now. I don't even know how many I have. I have a lot, and I plan on doing probably at least 5 to 6 more that I know of off the top of my head. So yeah, my entire plant setup over here is going to change. This corner is going to end up being a whole wall, and yeah, it's just, the poles are going to be a priority because I just love them that much, and I want to do more and keep growing bigger and bigger leaves. So that's a goal for me. Oh, okay. So besides the watering, I just wanted to touch on the soil mixture. You really want to make sure that you have a really chunky mix, because you want that water to drain straight through. You don't want that dense, compacted, just potting soil. You don't want soil to stay damp for a long period of time, because it's going to cause rot and other issues. So you really want free flowing soil for it to drain. You know, you can add water on top of the poles a couple days later and it may drain into the soil. So you want something that's free flowing so that you never feel like you're going to overwater your poles. I would recommend a clear nursery pot or any kind of nursery pot. You want something that has a lot of airflow, again, so that when you water the poles, the water will drain straight through. Because if you think about it, these nursery pots are in a heavy ceramic pot, you know, so the poles don't tip over. So that heavy pot in itself is restricting some airflow. If you just have holes on the bottom of your pot, your soil mix isn't really going to breathe that well. That's why I transitioned to clear pots with side holes, so that if they're sitting in a cache pot, air can still get in through the sides of the nursery pots and just help circulate and promote that airflow so that you don't have any kind of rot issues. Now, I will say I do not have any mold with my poles, or at least not that I have noticed. If you do see mold, I would say that you're probably not having good air circulation. So I have a fan running in my plant space here 24/7. It circulates the air. It is good to let your poles dry. If you constantly have moist sphagnum moss, moist soil, that is just, you're just bound to have like some kind of rot and mold and fungus growth. That's just normal with that kind of like environment. So it is okay and healthy for your poles to get dry. Mine get dry all the time and they're fine. Honestly, I let my poles get a little too dry this time, so it's okay if they dry out. Don't feel like if your moss is dry, it's the end of the world, because mine get dry every week. It happens, and that's why I use the pump sprayer. I will use that every day until I water the poles again to keep that area moist, because it's a lot of work and I can't really do this more than once a week. I could probably take a second day and do this, but it's a lot of effort and a lot of work. So I really can only do this once a week, and that's why I've started pouring water on top of the poles a couple days after this to ensure they stay moist a little bit longer. And then for like the next 2 to 3 days, I can just use my pump sprayer and the roots don't get too dried out, if that makes sense. Yeah, if for some reason while I'm editing this video, if I find I left something out or if a question pops up that I didn't cover, please let me know. Just leave a comment down below. I really hope this video was helpful for you guys. I honestly get asked so often about my poles and how to water them and care for them. So I really do hope this video was somewhat helpful for you, and it kind of maybe gives you an idea of how to care and manage your moss poles, and if it's something that you really even want to commit to doing, because it is a commitment. It is a lot of work. You have to take care of those moss roots like you would soil. Oh, I did think of one thing, fertilizer. So I use the fertilizer when I water. I don't know if I touched on this yet. I use the fertilizer in the water when I water my poles, because if you think of a normal plant in a pot, you would fertilize it, you know, just like your roots in the moss and roots in soil, they need fertilizer. So you need to supplement, because the sphagnum moss doesn't have any nutrients, you know, you need to provide those roots with nutrients. So I do use my fertilizer when I water. So yeah, I think that's it. I think I covered everything. I can't really think of anything else that I'm forgetting at the moment. If you have any questions or comments or any concerns, if you want to know anything else, just leave me a comment and I will look at those and get back to you. Yeah, I really hope this helped you learn how to care and manage your moss poles. Now keep in mind, this is just my way of doing things and what has worked for me. Everyone's going to be different, so keep that in mind. And if my way seems to be too much and other people can do it easier, then by all means, you know, you don't have to follow my advice or listen to what I'm saying or what I'm doing here. This is just what has been working for me. And as I learn and grow with poles, I'm sure I will learn a more efficient and better way of doing things. I honestly have evolved so much from when I first started doing moss poles, so just keep that in mind. You know, not everyone has the same way of doing things, and that's okay. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you made it through this entire video, I want you to leave me some kind of plant emoji down in the comments, because I want to know who watched this video the entire way through. I know it's a long video, but I really hope it helped you in some way, so I appreciate you guys so much. Yeah, let me know if you have any questions, and I'll talk to you guys later.